Don't run. Don't call police. Those 5 words came from a man chained to a post in the dark, covered in blood, barely breathing, chains cutting through his wrist to the bone. And the person who heard them wasn't a cop, wasn't a lawyer, wasn't anyone with power or protection or a plan. It was an 8-year-old boy who had woken up before sunrise to collect pine cones because his mother couldn't afford firewood. He stood in that clearing and he made a decision that would tear his entire city open and expose everything rotting underneath it. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Lucas Hayes changed everything began the way most ordinary mornings do, quietly, before anyone else was awake, with no sign at all of what was coming. He was 8 years old. He had pale blonde hair that refused to lay flat, no matter what his mother did to it, and gray eyes that tended to notice things twice. Once when they happened, and once again later, when most people had already moved on. He was the kind of boy who didn't make noise about things. He just watched. He just remembered. That Saturday morning, Lucas pulled on his green jacket, the one with the broken zipper that his mother had been meaning to fix for 3 months, laced up his worn sneakers in the dark, and picked up the canvas bag from the hook by the door. He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. He had done this walk before, more times than his mother knew. Into the forest at the edge of Pinecrest Road, deep enough under the old ponderosa pines where the ground stayed dry even after rain. He was going for pine cones, the dry ones, the ones his mother used to start the fire in the old stove, because firewood cost money they didn't always have, and pine cones were free if you were willing to walk far enough. He had made himself a private promise the night before. His mother, Claire, had come home from her night shift at the Cedarfield Mountain Lodge, her 3rd double in a row, scrubbing rooms, restocking towels, smiling at guests who looked through her like she was furniture. She had sat down at the kitchen table and pressed her face into both hands, and she hadn't cried. Claire Hayes never let herself fully cry. She said once that tears were expensive when you had a child to raise. But Lucas had watched her shoulders curl inward, and he had understood without a single word being spoken that she was tired in a way that 8 hours of sleep could not touch. So he had made himself a promise. He would get up early. He would do something useful. He would do what he could. That was who Lucas was. He did what he could. He was 15 minutes into the forest when the sound reached him. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low, pressurized groan, the kind of sound a person makes when they've used up most of their air and are working with what's left. Lucas stopped walking. His feet went still in the wet earth. His bag swung once at his side and then stopped too, as if it understood. He stood there and listened, and the sound came again, thin as wire pulled too tight, coming from somewhere off the path, in a direction he had no reason to go. He should have turned around. Every single thing he had ever been taught pointed one direction. Go home. Get your mother. Wait for an adult. Lucas knew that. He understood the logic of it. But he also knew something else. The thing you learn when you've spent years watching your mother handle crises alone because there was nobody else to call. Waiting for an adult to decide had a particular feeling. It felt like watching a door close while you stood on the wrong side. Lucas Hayes had stood on the wrong side of enough closing doors to know he didn't like how it felt. So he turned off the path and he walked toward the sound. The trees opened after about 30 yards, and then Lucas stopped breathing. The man was enormous. That was the first thing Lucas registered, not the blood, not the chains, but the sheer size of him, broad-shouldered and heavy, the kind of big that made the space around him feel compressed. He was bound to a thick wooden post that had been driven into the ground by someone who intended it to hold. His wrists were wrapped in chains that had cut deep enough into the skin to leave bruising the color of a thundercloud. His coat was torn in 3 places. His face was swollen on one side, his lower lip split open, one eye nearly shut from the tissue piled above it. His chest rose and fell in slow, grinding intervals, like an engine that had been running too long on too little. He was alive, just barely, but alive. Lucas stood at the edge of that clearing for 3 full seconds. He counted them later, the way you count things you want to remember precisely. Then the man's head moved. It was a small movement, the kind that happens when the body registers a presence before the mind has caught up. His one open eye found Lucas across the distance of that clearing. And what was in that eye? Lucas would try to describe it many times in the years that followed and never quite get it right. Was something that felt like a man seeing the last rope above a cliff and trying to decide whether it was worth the effort of reaching for it. His mouth opened. The sound that came out was barely a sound at all. It was air being pushed through a narrowing passage. But the words were clear. Don't run. Lucas didn't move. Don't call police. Lucas looked at the chains. He looked at the blood, dried dark along the man's temple and fresh where the wrist skin had broken again. He looked at the post, the depth of it, the deliberateness of it, and he made his calculation with the speed of a child who has learned that calculations sometimes have to be fast. Then he turned around, and he ran. Not away from the forest. He ran home to get his mother. Claire Hayes had been asleep for 4 hours. The front door did not open quietly. Lucas hit it at speed, and it went back against the wall with a bang that pulled Claire upright before she was fully conscious. She was on her feet by the time she registered waking up, already running the calculation that mothers run at every hour of the night. What is broken? Who is hurt? How bad? She met him in the hallway and looked at his face, and everything else fell away. She had seen that face once before, the night she had packed 2 bags with Lucas asleep on her shoulder and walked out of a house she was never going back to. That face meant something real had happened, something that was not going to wait. Mom. His voice was controlled, too controlled, the way children's voices get when they are working very hard not to come apart. There's a man in the forest. He's chained to a post. He's bleeding, and he said, Lucas swallowed. He said, don't call the police. Claire looked at her son for 1 full second. She did not tell him he was imagining things. She did not tell him it was probably an animal. She did not say, let me call someone. She turned around, went to the kitchen, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out the first aid kit she had assembled herself over years of being the only person available to handle things. She added a flashlight. She grabbed her keys. Show me, she said. Lucas showed her. The forest received them differently with 2 people. The sounds felt more deliberate. The dark between the trees felt like it had opinions. Claire walked with one hand on Lucas's shoulder and the other holding the kit, and she was almost at the clearing when she stopped. Do you smell that? Lucas looked up at her. Gasoline, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet, not the quiet of calm, the quiet of someone controlling a reaction that wanted to be much larger. She looked down and the flashlight found the ground, and she saw what she had been hoping not to see. Tire tracks, deep and fresh, the edges still wet and sharp, and beside them a drag mark, a wide furrow through the pine needles where something human-sized had been moved without its cooperation. Claire held her breath for 3 seconds. Then she walked into the clearing. The man was still there, still alive. She knelt beside him and her hands started moving before she had finished deciding to move them. Gauze on the temple, pressure on the wrist. She checked his breathing, shallow but consistent. She was pressing a second piece of gauze down when his eye opened. He looked at her face, and what she saw in it was not relief. It was assessment. Even like this, even bleeding and chained to a post in the dark at 5 in the morning, this man was calculating. Don't call police, he said. Same words as he'd said to her son. Flat, not a request, a statement. I'm not calling anyone, Claire said. I'm stopping you from dying. Can you stand? He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he said, if you help me. Getting him out of the forest was the hardest thing Claire Hayes had ever done with her body, and she had done a lot of hard things. He weighed well over 200 pounds of barely cooperative dead weight. Her hands kept losing their grip. Her arms burned by the third minute. Lucas walked ahead with the flashlight aimed low, exactly as she had told him. A small, serious figure picking out the safest path across wet roots and uneven ground with the focused precision of someone who understood that getting this wrong mattered. They didn't talk. There was no breath to waste on talking. When they hit the drainage ditch at the forest edge, Claire thought she might not be able to lift him over. She was wrong about that, the way she was wrong about a lot of things she thought she couldn't do. She lifted him. She always did the things she thought she couldn't. She did not take him to the rental house on Pinecrest Road. She was already thinking. She was already running through what she knew, what could be tracked, what could be seen. She had worked nights at the Cedarfield Mountain Lodge for 3 years. She knew every camera angle on that property, every blind spot, every service door that the owner had been promising to replace for 8 months. She parked in the back lot, pulled the man through the service entrance, and laid him on the mattress in the linen overflow room that she had slept in herself more than once when she missed the last bus and couldn't afford a cab. Then she called Savannah Reed. Savannah arrived in 20 minutes wearing scrubs and a coat thrown over them, and a look on her face that said she had not been sleeping and was not particularly surprised to receive this kind of call. She was an ER nurse with 8 years behind her, and her hands moved over the man with the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen everything the human body could be put through and had never once turned away from it. She checked his pulse, his pupils, his ribs. She pressed 2 spots along his left side, and he made a sound, and she nodded to herself as if confirming something she already suspected. "This wasn't a fight," she said quietly, more to herself than to Claire. "Someone did this carefully. Someone knew what they were doing and took their time doing it." "Who is he?" Claire said. Savannah looked up at her. "You don't know? I found him in the forest." Savannah looked at the man on the bed for a moment. Then she said, "Neither do I. But whoever he is, someone wanted to make sure he understood something before they left him there." She bent back to her work. "Hand me the tape." Lucas was standing at the foot of the bed. He had his teddy bear, Mr. Button, worn down to the fabric in one ear from being held too many times, clenched in both hands. He was watching Savannah work with the focus of a child studying something important. And while Savannah worked, and while Claire moved to the small table by the wall to get more gauze, Lucas saw something. Near the edge of the man's coat, a small object, wrapped in plastic, wrapped with the specific, careful deliberateness of someone who understood that what was inside mattered. It had probably shifted when they moved him. Lucas looked at his mother's back. He looked at Savannah's concentration. He thought about the tire tracks. He thought about the drag mark. He thought about the way someone had cut through this man's coat pockets. He had seen that in the forest, the careful slits along the seams, the inside pockets pulled open. They had been searching him. Lucas leaned forward. He picked up the small wrapped object. He turned it over in his hands once. And then, with the quiet deliberateness of a child who had learned early that the most important things are the ones people are already looking for, he pressed it down into the seam along the back of Mr. Button's worn fabric and held the opening closed with his thumb. He didn't know what was inside. He only knew that someone had hurt this man looking for it, and that whatever it was, it should not be easy to find. The man stirred. Something in his coat, a device, small, patterned vibrations, buzzed in a short sequence, and his eye opened with a sharpness that startled everyone in the room. He said one word, "Blake." 30 seconds later, 3 knocks landed on the door. Even, spaced, cold. Claire grabbed the mop handle from the wall before the door opened. She did it without thinking, which was how she had learned to do most things that mattered. The man who came in was built like a wall that had decided to start moving. Dark coat, collar up, eyes that swept the room in the time most people blink. Behind him, 2 others, hands loose at their sides in the specific neutrality that means the hands are close to something and the person wearing them wants you to know it. The first man looked past Claire, past Savannah, and found the figure on the bed, and said one word, "Boss." "Get out," Claire said. Her voice shook. She kept the mop handle up. The man, Blake, looked at her. Not with a threat, not with contempt, with something in between respect and warning that she didn't know how to read quickly enough. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I have no reason to believe that." "Ma'am," I said, "get out of this room." From the bed, a voice, crushed but still carrying, still possessing, even in that state, the quality of someone who expects to be heard once. "Hands down." The two men behind Blake went still. Blake's hands dropped to his sides. The room went quiet in a way that had a specific weight to it. Claire did not lower the mop handle, but the decision about what happened next had just moved somewhere else. The man on the bed looked at her, then at Lucas, then back at her. "My name is Damian Cross," he said. "Someone tried to kill me tonight. The man who did it is named Nathan Stone. He worked for me for 6 years. He paused. His breathing was still labored, each word costing him something. "He will come back to verify the work is finished. When he discovers I am alive, he will move quickly." Claire looked at him. "How quickly?" "Before morning," Damian said. "Maybe sooner." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Then Lucas, still holding Mr. Button, looked at his mother and said, in the flat, steady voice of a child who has already done the math, "Mom, we should lock the door." Claire looked at her son. She looked at the man on the bed. She looked at Savannah, who was already reaching for her phone with her jaw set and her eyes sharp and her hands not shaking even a little. "Lock the door," Claire said. Blake moved to do it, and somewhere in the dark of Cedarfield, Montana, a phone rang, and a man named Nathan Stone answered it, and the voice on the other end said the words Nathan Stone had been waiting all night not to hear. "He's not there. The post is empty." Nathan Stone went very still. Then he said very quietly, the way a man speaks when he is not surprised but is adjusting, "Find them, find who has him, and find what he was carrying." He paused. "Start with the lodge." He hung up. And the city that looked safe from a distance began to show, in the dark before sunrise, the shape of what it had always actually been. Damian Cross lay on the mattress in the linen overflow room and told Claire Hayes what she had walked into. Not everything, not the depth of it, not the years of it, not the full structure of what Nathan Stone had built and was now trying to protect, but enough. Enough that Claire could feel the walls of the room she had just entered begin to close. Nathan Stone had been Damian's second in command for 6 years. He had managed logistics, relationships, access. He had known every route, every contact, every piece of infrastructure that Damian Cross had built in Montana. And he had apparently been building something else alongside all of it. A play, long planned, patient, designed for exactly the moment when Damian was isolated enough to finish. Last night had been that moment. Nathan had made his move with the specific confidence of a man who has already imagined the outcome and believes in it completely. What Nathan had not imagined was a boy who woke up early to look for pine cones. "What was in your coat?" Claire said. Damian looked at her, not with evasion, with the careful look of someone deciding how much of the truth is useful right now. "Evidence," he said. "Of what?" "Of everything Nathan didn't want found." Claire looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at his mother. And for one moment, in that small, locked room with the sound of Savannah's quiet work and Blake's controlled breathing and the distant morning birds beginning outside the window, Claire Hayes understood something that she had not known when she walked into the forest. She had not just pulled a man off a post. She had picked up one end of a rope that ran all the way under this town, and now both hands were on it, and there was no clean way to let go. "Lucas," she said quietly. Her son looked up at her. She did not ask him the question out loud. She didn't have to. He looked at Mr. Button in his arms for a moment. He pressed the bear against his chest once, and then he looked at his mother with those gray eyes that had always seen things twice, and he nodded. Outside the window, the first thin light of a Montana morning was beginning to touch the edge of the sky. And the city of Cedarfield, the quiet kind, the familiar kind, the kind that closes at 9 and idles in the same spots every Tuesday morning like a habit, was 3 hours away from finding out that it had never been what it appeared to be. The locked door bought them maybe 2 hours. That was Blake's estimate, delivered in the flat tone of someone who had spent years calculating exactly how much time a locked door was worth in situations like this one. And 2 hours was apparently generous. Damien had not slept. He was propped against the wall with Savannah's bandaging wrapped around his wrists and his temple. And his one good eye was open and moving, cataloging the room, the exits, the people in it, with the systematic attention of a man whose body was broken, but whose mind had refused to follow. He watched Claire pace the length of the room, and he watched Lucas sit cross-legged on the floor with Mr. Button in his lap, and he watched Savannah repack the kit with the controlled efficiency of someone who had stopped asking questions and started solving problems. And something in his expression shifted, not softer exactly, more like a man who has not been in the same room as people like this in a very long time and is recalibrating what people like this look like. "You need to leave," Damien said. Claire stopped pacing. "Excuse me? You and the boy, you need to leave this room and go somewhere Nathan's people won't look first." His voice was still rough, still grinding, but the authority in it was entirely intact. "Blake will stay with me. You don't need to be here when they—" "When they what?" Claire said. "When they come through that door? When they find that we moved you? We are already in this, you understand that? The moment my son walked into that clearing, we were already in this." Damien looked at her. "That's exactly why you should leave." "And go where?" Her voice was not loud, but it had an edge in it that cut. "Go back to my house on Pinecrest Road? Go to work like nothing happened? My son found you. I moved you. My name is on the lodge employee roster. If Nathan Stone is half as organized as you're telling me he is, my name is already on a list somewhere." She held his gaze. "There is no leaving this. There is only deciding what to do inside it." The room held the silence for 3 full seconds. Then Blake, from his position by the door, said quietly, "She's right, boss." Damien looked at Blake, then back at Claire, and he made the expression of a man who has just encountered an argument he cannot dismantle and does not enjoy the experience. "All right," he said, "sit down." She sat, and he told her the rest of it. Nathan Stone had not acted alone. That was the first thing, and it landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. He had people inside Cedarfield, not just his own crew, but people who wore other faces during the day, people with offices and titles, and the kind of authority that towns like Cedarfield handed over to certain men, because those men had spent years making themselves appear reliable. The infrastructure Nathan had built inside this town while working under Damien's name was specifically designed to survive Damien's removal. It was a machine, and Nathan had built it to run without him. "The sheriff," Claire said. It wasn't a question. Something in the way she said it made Savannah look up. Damien's expression confirmed it without a word. "Dale Whitfield," Claire said. "I always thought there was something—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He came to the lodge twice last year, both times asking questions about the back entrance. I thought he was doing a safety review." "He was doing inventory," Damien said. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Lucas had not said anything for the last 20 minutes. He was sitting on the floor with Mr. Button held against his chest and his gray eyes moving steadily between the adults in the room, tracking the conversation the way he tracked everything. Twice, carefully, with the patience of someone who understands that understanding takes longer than hearing. Now he looked at his mother. "Mom," he said, "if the sheriff is bad, who do we call?" No one answered immediately, and the fact that no one answered immediately was itself an answer. And Lucas Hayes, who was 8 years old and had already done more math in the last 3 hours than most children do in a month, absorbed that answer completely. Savannah was the one who broke the silence. "We call someone outside Cedarfield," she said. She was looking at Damien. "You have federal contacts. You have to. A man who runs what you run doesn't survive without someone at that level who owes him something or wants something from him." Damien looked at her for a long moment. "Using that contact costs me more than I can explain to you right now." "I don't care what it costs you," Savannah said. The steadiness in her voice was remarkable. "A child is in this room. That is the only mathematics I'm doing." Another silence, shorter this time. "There's a name," Damien said. "A federal prosecutor. She's been trying to get me to make a trade for 3 years. Every time she reached out, I shut the door." He paused. "If I open it now, I can't close it again." "Open it," Claire said. "It means giving up the warehouse. Everything in it. 6 years of—" "Open it," she said again, and her voice did not shake. And Damien Cross, who had not been told what to do by anyone in longer than he could clearly remember, went quiet and looked at this woman sitting across from him in a linen overflow room in the middle of the night. And something in his jaw moved like a man swallowing something large. He looked at Blake. "Get me a clean phone." That was the first crack in the wall. And walls, once cracked, have a way of deciding to continue. The morning arrived faster than it had any right to. The thin gray light that came under the door told Claire it was close to 6, which meant the lodge staff would start arriving within the hour. The kitchen crew, the front desk woman who always came in early, the maintenance man who parked in the back lot and would absolutely notice the extra car. She had 20 minutes, maybe 30, before the quiet of the service entrance became a liability. Blake managed the logistics with the quiet professionalism of a man who treated problems the way engineers treat structural failures. Not with panic, but with the focused application of solutions in the correct sequence. He moved Damien to a different vehicle, a nondescript sedan that one of his men brought around to the far edge of the back lot. He ensured that nothing in the linen room looked disturbed beyond what could be attributed to normal use. He was thorough, and he was fast, and watching him work, Claire had the uncomfortable and clarifying thought that she was extremely relieved this man was currently on her side. She drove Lucas to school herself. She was not going to change that. Whatever else happened, whatever the morning held, her son was going to get into that school building and be surrounded by teachers and classmates and the specific ordinary safety of a place Nathan Stone had no reason to target. She drove the route and she checked the mirror the whole way, and she didn't see anyone following them. That was either good news or the kind of bad news that disguises itself as good news. She dropped Lucas at the front entrance, and he turned to look at her before he went in. And what was in his face was not fear. It was that composed, steady watchfulness that was somehow harder to look at than fear would have been. "Mr. Button stays with you," he said. "Lucas?" "Mom." He said it the way she sometimes said his name, with a weight behind it that meant, "I need you to hear this. Mr. Button stays with you, okay?" She took the bear. She held it, and she watched her son walk through those school doors carrying absolutely nothing except everything she had taught him about how to keep moving when the ground was gone. She did not cry until she was back in the car, and then only for 45 seconds, because 45 seconds was what she allowed herself, and then she put the car in drive. The black car appeared in her mirror before she had gone 3 blocks. It was not obvious about it. It didn't ride her bumper. It didn't flash its lights. It just existed in her rear view at the same distance for 4 blocks, then 5, then 6, and it changed directions when she changed directions, and disappeared around corners only to reappear on the next straight stretch with the patient certainty of something that already knows the outcome and is in no hurry. It was not trying to catch her. It was trying to teach her something. It was trying to tell her that she had already been caught, that wherever she went, there was a record of it, a timestamp, a notation. Claire drove to the diner, not because she wanted coffee, because a diner was a public place with windows and people, and the specific minor safety of witnesses. She parked where the black car couldn't block her in, and went inside and ordered coffee she didn't taste, and sat with her hands flat on the table and thought. She thought about Dale Whitfield. She thought about the 2 times he had come to the lodge. She thought about his car idling every Tuesday morning in the same spot, on the same corner, the habit of it, the comfort he seemed to take in routines, in being seen in the same places by the same people. She thought about the way small towns work, the way authority in a small town is personal before it is institutional, the way a man who holds a badge in a place where everyone knows his face has a completely different kind of power than his title technically grants him. And then her phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 rings. Then she picked up. "Mrs. Hayes," a woman's voice, professional, measured, carrying in it the particular economy of someone who had prepared exactly what she was going to say and was delivering it precisely. "My name is Sandra Voss. I'm a social worker with the Cedarfield County Department of Child and Family Services. I'm calling regarding a report that was filed this morning concerning your son, Lucas." Claire's hand tightened on the phone. "What report?" "A report was filed indicating that a minor in your household has been exposed to an environment linked to violent criminal activity. We are required by law to conduct an assessment. I'd like to schedule—" "Who filed the report?" Claire said. A pause, brief, calibrated. "I'm not able to share that information at this stage of the—" "Who filed the report?" Claire said again. Her voice was very quiet. The social worker continued as if Claire had not asked. "Assessment, preliminary review, scheduling a home visit." The words arranged themselves into the architecture of a process that was entirely legal and entirely correct, and was going to be used to dismantle her life with the precision of a scalpel in hands that had been pointed at her by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Claire said, "I'll need to speak with my attorney before scheduling anything." She hung up. She did not have an attorney. She called Savannah. They filed a report with CPS. Savannah's response was 3 seconds of silence and then, "How long ago?" The woman said this morning, which means it was filed before 6 a.m., which means whoever did it in the dark, before the town was even awake. She paused. "This is Dale." "Of course it's Dale," Savannah said. "Claire, listen to me. Don't go back to your house right now. Don't go anywhere they expect you to be. Come to the hospital. Come in through the ER bay. The call cut out. Not dropped. Cut. The specific, clean silence of a call that has been ended by something other than geography. Claire put the phone down on the table and looked at it. Then she looked out the diner window and saw the black car, still there, still patient, parked on the opposite side of the street with its engine running. She left $4 on the table and walked out. She called Damien from a payphone 2 blocks away. There was still one in Cedarfield, outside the hardware store, because Cedarfield was the kind of town that hadn't gotten around to removing them. Blake answered on the second ring. She told him about the CPS call. She told him about the cut call. She told him about the black car. She told him about Dale. There was a brief exchange of voices she couldn't fully hear, and then Damien's voice came on. Still rough, still carrying that quality of compressed authority even over a payphone line. "There's a community meeting tonight," he said. "Cedarfield Community Hall. Dale announced it this morning. He framed it as a public safety update." Claire felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, something colder and more specific than fear. "He's going to put my name in that room." "Yes." "In front of the whole town?" "Yes. And if I don't show up, it looks like I'm guilty. And if I do show up, it looks like exactly what he wants it to look like," Damien said. "A woman connected to dangerous people, facing questions she can't answer publicly without making everything worse." The silence between them stretched. "Come anyway," Damien said. "Why?" "Because I'm going to be there." Claire looked at the payphone receiver in her hand. That makes it worse. You know that. If you walk in there, Dale will use you as the proof of everything he's already implied. I know, Damien said. Come anyway. She went home first. She needed dry clothes and she needed to think, and she needed to hold Mr. Button for a reason she couldn't fully articulate, except that it was the last thing Lucas had handed her, and it anchored something in her that was in serious danger of drifting loose. She sat on the edge of the bed and held the bear, and that was when she felt it. The slight stiffness along the back seam, the small object held inside. She pressed it carefully and felt the hard, rectangular edge of something thin, something deliberately placed. She looked at the bear for a long moment. She thought about the drag mark. She thought about the slitted pockets. She thought about her son, cross-legged on the floor of the linen room, watching Savannah work with his bear held close. She thought about him saying, "Mr. Button stays with you." Not, "I'll keep Mr. Button. You keep him, Mom." She pressed the seam open with steady fingers, and she held in her palm a micro SD card wrapped in heat-sealed nylon, small as a thumbnail, light as nothing, carrying in its silent architecture everything Nathan Stone had been willing to chain a man to a post to find. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the specific, overwhelming quality of the moment when you understand that an 8-year-old saw something that 3 armed men had missed. Her son, her boy who collected pine cones before sunrise because he wanted his mother to have warm mornings. Her boy who had looked at a dying man in the dark and understood without being told that the thing near him was the thing people were looking for. Her boy who had hidden it in a teddy bear and then put that bear in her hands and told her to hold him, like he was trusting her with himself. Claire Hayes pressed the card in her closed fist. She held it there for a full minute. Then she stood up, put on her coat, and walked out the door toward the community hall. Whatever was in that room, she was going into it with the truth in her hand. And that was more than Dale Whitfield had ever brought into any room in his life. The community hall was already full when Claire pushed through the doors, and the air inside hit her like a wall, warm and close, and humming with the specific frequency of a crowd that had already made up its mind and was waiting for someone to confirm it. She felt the shift of eyes the moment she stepped in. Not all at once. One by one, the way dominoes fall, each person noticing her and then watching to see what the person next to them did about it. She kept her chin level and her hands still, and she walked to the 3rd row and sat down and put her coat in her lap with the SD card in her fist inside the pocket, and she waited. Dale was already at the podium. He had the face he kept for public occasions, a face that had been carefully constructed over years to communicate gravity without alarm, authority without arrogance, the specific, reassuring competence of a man who has everything under control and wants you to feel the comfort of that. He was good at it. Claire had thought so before tonight. She thought so even more now, watching it from the inside of what it was actually doing. He talked about safety. He talked about community. He used the word threat 4 times in the first 3 minutes, and each time he used it, the air in the room tightened slightly, like a cord being wound. He did not say Claire's name. He didn't need to. He talked about a situation involving a local resident, a serious incident, possible ties to criminal elements from outside Cedarfield. And every head in that room turned, 1 degree at a time, toward the woman in the 3rd row with the blonde hair and the steady eyes. The woman next to Claire shifted her chair 2 inches to the right. It was a small movement. It was one of the loneliest things Claire had ever experienced. She gripped the SD card and said nothing. Then the back door opened, and the room changed. Damian Cross walked in, and the crowd parted without being asked. The way people move for something they don't know how to name. He was still bruised, the stitched line at his eyebrow still visible, the swelling at his jaw still present, and he walked with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body was reminding him of the last 24 hours with every step. Behind him came a man in a dark suit carrying a portfolio, an attorney, obviously, the kind whose hourly rate was a number most people in this room would never see in a week. Blake and two others followed at a measured distance. Professional, calm, immovable. Dale's smile stayed exactly where he had put it, but behind his eyes something recalculated so fast, Claire could almost hear it. The attorney requested the floor. Dale, with the smooth instinct of a man who understood that refusing would look worse than allowing, granted it. The attorney's voice filled the room without effort, clear and even, and carrying the particular authority of someone who charges for every word and has therefore learned to make every word count. He stated that his client was the victim of a premeditated, coordinated assault. He stated that evidence existed connecting the assault to organized criminal activity. He stated that the subsequent spread of rumors through this community was actively endangering a material witness and a child, and that his client intended to pursue every available legal remedy against any individual or institution that contributed to that endangerment. That last phrase, a child, landed differently than anything else had. Claire felt it go through the room, felt people recalibrate, because they had not been thinking about Lucas as a witness. They had been thinking about him as a detail in the story about his mother. Hearing him named as the thing being endangered shifted something in the room's architecture, and Dale felt it too, and Claire watched him decide in real time to take the opening back. He stepped forward. He raised his voice to just above conversational, the practiced volume of a man who knows how to fill a room without appearing to try. He said he wanted to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Cross, and he said it in the tone of a man acknowledging the presence of a problem he had been expecting. He said that the community had a right to understand the full context of the situation they were facing. He said that when a man with Mr. Cross's particular history arrived at a public safety meeting, that itself was information. He never named what that history was. He didn't have to. The room's imagination was already running ahead of him, filling in the blanks with everything fear suggested. Damien's jaw was tight. He was looking at Claire, and Claire was looking back at him. And what passed between them in that look was not a plan. It was a warning. She shook her head, once barely visible. Not like that. Then the side door opened. Two women in official coats, lanyards, the specific economy of movement that belongs to people who carry institutional authority like a tool they've used so many times it fits perfectly in the hand. One of them scanned the room and found Claire with the efficiency of someone who already knew exactly where she was sitting. Claire Hayes? Her voice was professional and not unkind, which somehow made it worse. We're with the Department of Child and Family Services. We've received a report and we're conducting an emergency assessment regarding your son, Lucas. We need you to come with us. The hall went silent, completely, absolutely silent, in the way that only happens when something has occurred that takes a moment for the brain to fully process. Then the murmurs started, low and spreading, and they were different from the murmurs of before. Before, the room had been processing fear. Now it was processing something more uncomfortable. The sight of a mother about to lose her child in a room full of people who had spent the last 20 minutes being pointed at her like a compass pointed at a threat. Claire stood up. She held Lucas's bear against her chest with one arm, and she looked at the woman and she said, with a steadiness that cost her more than she would ever explain to anyone, "On what grounds?" "Ma'am, we have a report indicating—" "On what specific grounds?" Claire said. "My son has not been harmed. My son has not been neglected. My son found a man who needed help and came and got me, and we helped him. If that is what constitutes an unsafe environment in this county, then I need someone in this room to explain to me what a safe one looks like." Several people in the crowd shifted. Someone near the back said something too low to hear clearly, but the tone of it was not agreement with Dale. The CPS worker did not back down. She was doing a job, and she had a report in her hand, and the report created a legal obligation, and she was not the architect of any of this. She was a mechanism, and mechanisms don't argue. "Ma'am, I understand this is distressing, But we are required to. I know what you're required to do, Claire said. Her voice cracked, just once, on the last word, and then it steadied again. I know exactly what you're required to do, and I know who required you to do it tonight, in this room, in front of these people. And I want everyone in this hall to understand that they are watching a woman lose her child because she pulled a dying man off a post in the forest. That is what is happening right now. That is what this meeting is actually for. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room in which a version of events has just been contested publicly, and everyone is waiting to see who moves next. Dale moved next. He stepped to the microphone and used the practiced steadiness of a man who has controlled rooms before and is confident he can control this one. He said with measured sadness that no one wanted to see this situation, that the community's safety had to come first, that difficult decisions sometimes looked harsh from the outside, but were necessary. He said it the way certain people say things, fully aware that the words mean nothing and that the performance of the words is the entire point. And Claire watched Lucas being guided toward the side door by the second CPS worker, a woman with careful hands and an apologetic expression that was genuine. Claire could see that. She was genuinely sorry. She was just also following a process that had been set in motion by someone she would never meet. Lucas turned at the door. He turned back. And in that last moment before he disappeared into the hallway, he crossed the full distance of the room with his eyes and found his mother, and he shoved Mr. Button into her arms. He pressed a small folded piece of paper into the bear's worn fur, and he said, loud enough for the people near her to hear, in a voice that was working very hard to stay level, "Hold him for me, Mom." The doors closed. Claire stood in the middle of the community hall of Cedarfield, Montana, holding a worn teddy bear, and the sound she made was not a word and was not a cry. It was what happens when a person's body removes language from the equation entirely because language is insufficient. Savannah was beside her in 3 seconds, hands on her shoulders, steady as a wall. Damien was on his feet. Blake had his hand on Damien's arm because Blake had understood what was about to happen before Damien had finished deciding to do it. "Don't," Claire said. She said it directly to Damien across the room, loud enough that the people between them heard it. "If you do it your way, I lose him forever. Do you understand me? They will use it. They will use every second of it, and I will never get him back." Damien Cross stood with his fists clenched and his jaw set, and his entire body arguing with itself, and the crowd around him watched a man who had never in his life been told to stand down, stand down. He didn't sit, but he went still, and the stillness was its own kind of statement. Cole Parker was standing near the back of the room. He had been there the whole time, in the shadow near the exit, technically present as department personnel at a public meeting, and he had watched all of it. He had watched the CPS workers arrive. He had watched Dale's face when they came through the door. The micro expression, a quarter second, the satisfaction of a man watching a mechanism he built execute correctly. Cole had seen that expression. He had filed it. He was 26 years old, and he had 14 months in the department, and he was standing in a room where he had just watched a boy hand his mother a teddy bear as a goodbye. And he was feeling something crack open in his chest. That was the distance between the officer he was supposed to be and the person he actually was. He watched Claire unfold the small piece of paper with fingers that could barely hold themselves steady enough to manage it. He was too far away to read it, but he watched her face when she read it. And what moved across her face was not grief and not fear. It was something more focused than either of those. The expression of a person who has just received information and is already moving toward what to do with it. She looked up. She looked directly at Damien. She said one word, "Savannah." Savannah was already reaching for her bag. They went to the hospital, not the front entrance, the ER bay, the way Savannah had said. They sat in the supply room at the back of the third corridor, and Savannah pulled out a small laptop and a card reader and inserted the SD card with hands that did not shake. Because Savannah Reed's hands did not shake, it was simply not something they did. The folder opened. Dense, labeled in codes, dozens of files layered in the flat, systematic architecture of records kept by someone who documented everything because documentation was leverage. Savannah opened an audio file and pressed play, and Nathan Stone's voice filled the room. Claire had never heard Nathan Stone speak before. She had heard his name. She had heard Damien describe him. But hearing the voice was different. It was calm. That was the first thing. Not the calm of someone at peace, but the calm of someone who has decided that everything is a transaction, and all transactions are manageable, and the only question is the correct price. He spoke with a habit of pausing before significant statements. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3, and the pausing was a form of control, a demonstration that he was in no hurry, that time bent to his schedule rather than the other way around. The recording moved through routes, in quantities, in timestamps, and then a name appeared in the audio that made Savannah's hands stop moving over the keyboard. Dale. Spoken with the casual familiarity of someone referring to a piece of equipment that has always performed correctly. Instructions given, a pickup confirmed, a time noted. And then Nathan's voice, even and unhurried. Make sure Dale handles the paperwork on the Hayes woman. I want it clean. I want it to hold. The room went absolutely still. Then Claire said very quietly, he was already planning this. Before last night. Before any of this. He already had a file on me. Damien was standing by the door. His expression had gone somewhere interior and cold. Nathan doesn't improvise. He builds. Every contingency mapped in advance. He paused. The CPS report, Dale's involvement, the community meeting, that was not a reaction to this morning. That was the ready position. The moment I disappeared from that post, the machine started. Savannah looked at both of them. So what stops the machine? This card, Claire said. The card plus someone outside Dale's reach who can receive it and act on it before Dale buries it at the county level, Damien said. He looked at Claire. The federal contact. I need to make that call tonight. You said it cost you everything, Claire said. Yes. The warehouse. 6 years of work. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then you need to decide if Lucas is worth that. And Damien Cross, who had built his entire existence on the principle that nothing was worth the warehouse, said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Get me Blake's phone." He made the call in the hallway. Claire didn't hear the words. She heard the tone, controlled, certain, the tone of a man who had prepared a thing he had spent years refusing to prepare, and was now delivering it with the precision of someone who understands that the only way to do a hard thing correctly is to do it completely. He was on the phone for 11 minutes. When he came back in, his face was the face of someone who has paid a price and has decided not to examine the receipt. She wants the card delivered in person, he said. Federal prosecutor's office. Savannah takes it tomorrow morning, walks it in herself. Clean chain of custody, no connection to me or my people. He looked at Savannah. Can you do that? Savannah looked at him with the expression she reserved for questions whose answers were self-evident. I'm a nurse. I've been in worse rooms than a federal prosecutor's office. There's one more thing, Damien said. The quality of his voice shifted, just slightly, just enough for Claire to register it and feel the hair on her arms respond before she knew why. The video came in while we were in the hall. He held out Blake's phone. Claire took it. She pressed play. A harsh, white-lit room, her son sitting in a chair, chin up, trying to look straight at the camera with the effortful composure of a child who has been practicing being brave for an audience he loves. Behind him, a man's voice, not visible, not identified, spoke with a specific flatness of a statement designed to be understood once. Hand over what you have, all of it. Do that, and the boy goes home. The video ended. The sound Claire made lasted 3 seconds. Then Savannah's hands were on her shoulders again, and Claire was pressing both fists against her mouth and breathing through her nose because breaking apart was not an option. It was not permitted. It was not going to happen. She had made that decision in the first 10 seconds of watching that video, and she was holding to it with everything she had. They don't know what they're looking for, Damien said. His voice was careful, deliberate. He was managing her reaction with the specific attention of someone who understands that the next 90 seconds are going to determine the next 90 hours. They know the card exists. They don't know it's already in Savannah's possession, which means they think they have leverage, which means Lucas is safe until they believe they don't. How long does that buy us? Claire said. Her voice was flat, stripped down, operating on something below emotion. Enough, Damien said. That's not an answer. 12 hours, maybe 14, he held her gaze. I need you to trust me for 14 hours. Claire Hayes looked at the phone in her hand. She looked at Savannah. She looked at the SD card sitting on the laptop beside the audio file of Nathan Stone's voice, counting out his silences before each order, as if time itself was something he owned. She thought about her son sitting in a chair with his chin up, trying to be brave. She thought about the folded piece of paper. She thought about the note in her son's handwriting, blocky, careful, the letters of a child applying everything he'd learned to something no school had prepared him for. Mr. Button has a secret. Don't trust anyone. Remember the gasoline smell. She closed her hand around the phone. 14 hours, she said, and then I go to that room myself and I burn every piece of this to the ground, with or without your help. Damien nodded, and the look in his eye was not condescension, and not pity, and not the complicated calculation of a man managing a woman he considered secondary to the operation. It was something closer to the look he had given her across the community hall when she told him, not like that. The look of a man who has encountered, several times in the last 24 hours, a level of resolve that his particular world does not produce, and is having to revise his understanding of what people are capable of. I know, he said. Cole Parker knocked on the supply room door at 11:47 p.m. He was not in uniform. He had a cap pulled low and the expression of someone who had been arguing with himself for the last 6 hours and had finally stopped arguing. He held a thin envelope in both hands. He said nothing for a moment, just stood in the doorway, looking at Claire with a look that was rough around the edges and entirely genuine. Then he said, I couldn't watch it. I stood in that room and I watched him take that bear off and put it in your arms and He stopped, started again. I've been in this department 14 months. I have seen Dale change things before. Documents, reports, nothing big enough to, but tonight was different. Tonight was, he held out the envelope. I pulled everything I could access, deletion logs, timestamps, the edit screen with his credentials on it. It's all in there. Claire took the envelope. She opened it. She looked at the pages inside. And for the first time since this had started, since the forest and the gasoline smell, and the lock on the service door, and the SD card, and the video of her son sitting in a white-lit room trying to hold himself together, she felt something that was not fear, and not grief, and not the white-hot, controlled fury that had been keeping her upright for the last 18 hours. It was smaller than any of those and more durable. It was the specific feeling of a door opening instead of closing, of ground that had not entirely given way, of evidence in her hand that said what happened actually happened, documented by someone who did not have to document it and had done it anyway. She looked at Cole. She did not thank him. The moment was too serious for thank you. She said, "You understand what this means for you." "Yes," he said. "Dale will know." "Yes." "Your job." "I know what it means," Cole said, and in his voice was the quiet, non-dramatic certainty of a person who has made a decision and arrived on the other side of it and is not going back. I know what it means. I did it anyway. He paused. Where I come from, that's the whole point. Claire looked at this young man in a pulled-down cap with the envelope held in both hands. She thought about her son. She thought about what it had cost Lucas to walk through those school doors that morning, carrying nothing but what she had taught him. She thought about how courage reproduced itself, how it moved from one person to another, not through instruction, but through example, through witnessing, through the specific contagious quality of watching someone do the right thing in a room where the wrong thing would have been so much easier. She put the envelope with the SD card. She put both in her coat pocket, and she felt the weight of them there, small and undramatic, and carrying between them the full shape of the truth. And she said quietly, to the room and to no one in particular, and to everyone at once, "Okay, now we go get my son." The 14 hours did not pass quietly. Savannah left for the federal prosecutor's office at 6 in the morning with the SD card and a sealed evidence envelope she had signed and dated herself, and the laptop with the audio file copied to a second drive, and the kind of face that made the security guard at the building entrance step aside without asking twice. She had called ahead. The contact Damien had given her had answered on the first ring, which told Savannah everything she needed to know about how long that woman had been waiting for exactly this kind of call. Claire did not sleep. She sat in the back room of a motel 2 towns over that Blake had secured under a name that wasn't hers, and she held the envelope from Cole, and she went through every page again, not because she needed to read it again, but because holding it kept her hands occupied, and her hands needed to be occupied, or the rest of her would follow them somewhere she couldn't afford to go. Damien was in the next room. She could hear the low murmur of his voice through the wall, calls being made, instructions being given, the machinery of a man who operated at a level she had no full map of, moving pieces she couldn't entirely see. She had decided to trust that. She had made that decision in the supply room, and she was not going to unmake it at 3 in the morning with her son somewhere in a white-lit room trying to hold his chin up. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She picked up on the first ring. "He's okay." A woman's voice, not the CPS worker from before. Someone different, quieter. The voice of someone calling outside the bounds of what their job required. "I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I've been in the room with him tonight and he's okay. He's eating. He asked for his bear." A pause. "I just thought you should know." Claire pressed the phone hard against her ear. "Who are you?" "Someone who has a kid the same age," the woman said, and then the line was empty. Claire sat with the dead phone against her ear for a long moment. Then she set it down and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed until the shaking in her chest moved back down to somewhere manageable. He asked for his bear. He didn't know she had it. He asked for it anyway because it was the last piece of home he had access to. And the image of that, her son asking for a bear he didn't know, was already in his mother's hands, broke something in her and rebuilt it in the same motion. She knocked on the wall between the rooms. Damien appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. He looked like a man who had gotten 2 hours of sleep and had decided that was sufficient. "What happened?" "Nothing bad," she said. "Someone called to tell me he's okay." She paused. "Someone on the inside. Someone with a conscience." She looked at Damien. "There are more of those than Nathan Stone planned for." Damien considered that. Then he said, "Yes, there usually are." He said it with the specific weight of a man who had spent years accounting for the opposite and was recalibrating. The morning moved fast after that. Savannah called at 8:14 from outside the prosecutor's office. Her voice was controlled, but Claire had known Savannah long enough to hear underneath it. The specific quality of control that means something significant has just happened, and the body hasn't finished processing it yet. "She listened to the whole recording," Savannah said. "She played it twice. She pulled her team in before I'd finished explaining the deletion logs." A pause. Claire, she said the timestamps match an active federal investigation. Nathan Stone has been on a watch list for 2 years. This card, what's on it? It's not just Cedarfield. It goes up. Claire closed her eyes. How far up? Far enough that she made calls while I was still sitting across the desk from her. Savannah's voice dropped half a register. They're moving tonight. Tonight, Claire repeated. She said she needs the chain of custody clean. She said Cole's logs are exactly what they need to establish Dale's interference. She asked me specifically about the boy. Savannah paused. I told her everything. I told her about the forest, and the post, and the pine cones, and Mr. Button. I told her what Lucas did. Her voice went rough for just a moment. She stopped writing and looked at me. She said, "That child needs to be home." Claire put her hand over her mouth, nodded at no one, then took her hand away and said, "What do we do until tonight?" "You stay out of sight," Savannah said, "and you let the people whose job this is do their job. Can you do that?" "No," Claire said honestly, "but I'll do it anyway." She was wrong about staying out of sight. By noon, the message arrived. It came to Blake's clean phone, routed through a channel that should not have had the number, which told Damien immediately that someone inside his own remaining network had given it up. The message was text, short, 8 words. Warehouse 11, Old Freight Yard, tonight. Bring what you have. Damien read it and set the phone on the table and looked at it the way you look at something you recognize but were hoping not to see. Blake read it over his shoulder and said nothing. He didn't need to. They had both built enough of these architectures to know what this one was. "It's Nathan," Blake said. "It's Nathan using Dale's reach," Damien said. "He knows about the federal contact. Someone told him." He looked at Blake. "The message isn't for me. It's for her." The door to the next room was open. Claire was standing in the doorway. "I heard," she said. "You're not going," Damien said. "Tell me what Warehouse 11 is." Damien looked at her for a moment. "Old freight facility on the south edge of town. Nathan has been using it for... It's off the books. 3 exits, multiple sightlines, 6 security cameras that Dale's department installed officially, but that Nathan controls the feeds on." He paused. "It is the worst possible location for you to be tonight." "They have my son," Claire said. "What is the best possible location?" "There is no best possible location. That's the point. Nathan built this so that every option you have ends in the same place. You show up, you hand over the evidence, and whatever story Dale needs to tell writes itself around the exchange." Damien kept his voice flat, but there was something underneath it that was not flat at all. "You arrested at the location of a clandestine handoff. Evidence linking you to organized crime. CPS file already open. That case closes in one direction and it doesn't open again." The room held the silence for 10 full seconds. Then Claire said, "So we go with a better plan than just showing up." Damien looked at her. Blake looked at Damien, and something passed between them that Claire recognized as 2 people who have worked together long enough to conduct an entire conversation in 2 seconds. "Cole," Blake said. "Cole," Damien agreed. Cole Parker answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting, which told Claire he had been expecting some version of this call. When Damien finished, Cole said, "I can be at the freight yard perimeter by 8. I can hold a position on the north side near the access road. If something goes wrong..." He stopped, then started again. "If something goes wrong, I have an outside channel. Not Dale's network, county emergency bypass. It routes above his rank." "You understand what happens when you use it," Damien said. "I've understood what was going to happen since I put those papers in that envelope," Cole said, and his voice was steady with the particular steadiness of a decision that has already been fully made and is not available for revision. Damien made 2 more calls. He made them in the bathroom with the door closed, and Claire did not hear the words, but she heard the tone, and the tone was the specific tone of a man calling in things he had been holding in reserve for years and had never expected to need. When he came out, his face was set in the expression she had started to recognize as his version of composed, not calm, but everything compressed below the surface and running at a speed that didn't show. "The prosecutor is pushing the timeline," he said. "She wants the warehouse at 9, federal vehicles at 9, which means whatever Nathan is planning at warehouse 11 needs to land before 9 or it loses its window." He looked at Claire. "He's going to use you to buy himself that window, to create enough noise in Cedarfield tonight that Dale can manage the local narrative before the federal presence arrives. Which means he needs me in that freight yard before 8, Claire said. "Yes. Which means Lucas." She said it flatly, without inflection. "He's going to use Lucas to make sure I'm there before 8. No one answered. The answer was in the quality of the silence. Claire picked up her coat. She put it on. She put Cole's envelope in the inside pocket, and she put her hand flat against the outside of the pocket and felt the shape of it there. Then she looked at Damien. "If I walk into that yard tonight with nothing in my hands, Nathan gets nothing, and Dale gets nothing, and the whole machine stalls. Is that right? If you walk in with nothing, Dale arrests you on the charges he already has prepared, and by the time the federal vehicles arrive at my warehouse, you are already in a cell, and Lucas is already in a placement, and the story Dale tells tonight becomes the official record." Damien's voice was exact, careful. He was giving her the truth, and she could feel the effort of that. A man who had spent his career controlling information, giving it away cleanly, because the person across from him needed the real version. "You need to be in that yard in a way that the arrest doesn't stick, which means witnesses who are not Dale's people, which means Cole on that outside channel the moment the cuffs go on, which means I walk in after you. You said if you walk in, Dale uses it. He will try." Damien said it with a flatness that was its own kind of statement. "He needs me to react. He has always needed me to react. 6 years of Nathan feeding him information about me, building a file, and every charge in it required me to be aggressive, unpredictable, retaliatory." He paused. "So I won't be." Claire looked at him. "You're going to let him arrest you?" "I'm going to let him arrest me," Damien said, "in front of every recording device in that freight yard, with my hands up and my mouth shut, and Cole's channel open to a federal line, and the full weight of what is on that SD card already sitting in a federal prosecutor's office." He met her eyes. "They can arrest me. They cannot hold me. Not tonight. Not with what Savannah already delivered." The quiet that followed was the quiet of two people who have arrived, from completely different directions, at the same terrible and necessary place. Blake drove them separately. Claire went first, with a 40-minute gap. She drove herself in her own car because arriving in Damien's vehicle was exactly the image Dale needed. She parked at the edge of the freight yard access road, and she sat in the car for 2 minutes, and she said, out loud, to no one and to her son and to herself all at once, "I'm coming. You hold on. I'm coming right now." Then she got out of the car. Dale materialized before she reached the building. That was the first thing, not Nathan, not his men, but Dale, with 3 patrol cars arranged behind him and deputies fanning out with the practiced geometry of a planned operation. Red and blue light cutting across everything. He read her rights in the baritone he reserved for recorded moments, and he listed the charges in the deliberate cadence of a man who had prepared this speech and was delivering it as designed. Concealing evidence, possession of materials linked to criminal activity, obstruction of a child welfare proceeding. Claire kept her hands visible and her face still. She looked at Dale and she thought about the recording. She thought about Nathan Stone's voice saying, "Make sure Dale handles the paperwork on the Hayes woman." She thought about this man standing in front of her with his badge and his careful face and his years of practiced gravity, and she thought about what he actually was, which was a mechanism, a reliable piece of equipment, and she felt something that was not hatred and was not fear. It was the cold, clear feeling of someone who knows the truth and knows they can prove it and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. A deputy moved toward her with cuffs, and then a voice from the side, quiet, firm, not loud but carrying with it the specific quality of institutional weight landing in exactly the right place. That's not standard procedure for a material witness. I'll take custody personally. Owen, the deputy, stepped between Claire and the patrol car door. Dale turned to him with the expression of a man who has just seen an expected thing go unexpectedly sideways. Parker, get out of... My name is Cole Parker, and I am documenting this arrest on an outside channel, Cole said, and his voice did not shake, not even slightly. And if this suspect is harmed during this process, I will report directly to county oversight and to the federal line I currently have open. He paused one beat. Sir. Dale's face went through 3 different calculations in 2 seconds. He landed on authority, the familiar face, the established posture, the tone that had always closed rooms before. You are 1 month from being terminated, Parker. You want to make that happen tonight? I want to do my job correctly tonight, Cole said. Yes, sir. The freight yard held its breath. Then Damian Cross walked out of the dark. He walked in slowly, deliberately, both hands raised, palms visible at shoulder height, the universal posture of a man who is making a statement about what he is not doing. He walked into the full radius of the red and blue light, and he looked at Dale Whitfield and he said nothing for a long moment. Just let himself be seen. The bruises still visible, the stitched line at his eyebrow, the evidence of what Nathan Stone's people had done to him, displayed under the lights of a freight yard in front of Dale and his deputies, and Cole's open outside channel, and every recording device in a 50-foot radius. Then he said, "Arrest me." His voice was level, almost quiet. Go ahead, arrest me right now, on camera, in front of all of it. He kept his hands up. Do it. Dale stared at him, and in Dale's eyes, for the first time in this entire sequence of events, was something that was not calculation. It was the specific expression of a man who has just understood that the trap he set has been entered by someone who read the exit before they came through the door. He arrested Damian anyway, because at this point there was no other move. The cuffs went on, and Damian did not react, and did not resist, and kept his face composed, and turned his head toward Cole and said, in a voice calibrated exactly for the outside channel Cole was holding, "Get the feds here now. Altered evidence. Staged arrest. Suspect connected to organized violence." He paused. "Tell them Nathan Stone is in that building." Cole's thumb was already on the radio. His voice was steady as bedrock when he opened the federal channel and used the words Damian had given him. The specific words in the specific order that meant something above Dale's rank and beyond Dale's reach. And somewhere in Montana that was not Cedarfield, a woman who had been waiting 3 years for Damian Cross to open a door picked up the call and said, "We're already moving." The federal vehicles were supposed to arrive at 9. They arrived at 8:41, which was 8 minutes after Cole opened the channel, and 19 minutes after Nathan Stone's men, realizing the window was closing, attempted to move Lucas from wherever they were holding him, and were intercepted by 2 vehicles from Damian's network that Blake had positioned on the only 2 viable exit routes from that side of town. The intercept was clean. No one was hurt. Lucas was in a car with one of Blake's people for 11 minutes before a federal vehicle pulled alongside, and the transfer was made with the specific, swift, procedural efficiency of people who had done this before, and understood that every second a child was in motion was a second of unnecessary risk. Cole heard the confirmation on the outside channel. He was standing next to Damian's patrol car with one hand on the roof and the other holding the radio, and when the words came through, child located, child secure, child unharmed, his legs did something he would later describe as temporarily forgetting their job. He caught himself on the car door. He breathed. He looked at the radio. He looked at the freight yard full of federal vehicles and Dale Whitfield standing with his hands at his sides, and the specific expression of a man watching the architecture he built come apart, piece by piece, in front of people who are writing everything down. Nathan Stone was arrested inside Warehouse 11 at 8:53, 7 minutes before the originally planned federal arrival, in a room that contained, among other things, a ledger that matched the container logs on the SD card, with a completeness that federal forensic accountants would later describe as, essentially, a confession with footnotes. Dale was taken into federal custody at the freight yard. He did not resist. He stood very still while the cuffs went on, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man who was surprised. It was the expression of a man who had known, somewhere in the part of himself he had been refusing to listen to for years, that this was how it ended, that every compromise had a final account, that the certainty he had traded everything for was not certainty at all. It was just a longer distance between the first bad choice and the last consequence. Claire Hayes was standing 20 feet away when the cuffs went on Dale. She watched it without expression. She had been watching this man for years without knowing what she was watching, and now she knew. And the knowing was not satisfying and was not triumphant and was not any of the things that moments like this are supposed to feel like in stories. It was simply complete. It was the specific feeling of a thing being finished. Then a federal vehicle pulled into the far end of the freight yard access road, and the door opened and a small figure climbed out. Lucas Hayes stood at the edge of the freight yard in the dark, pale and thinner than he'd been, and wearing the same clothes he'd had on when the CPS workers walked him out of the community hall. He was holding himself with the careful composure of a child who had been being brave for too long and was in the last inch of it. He looked across the distance of the yard. He found his mother. And the composure came apart all at once, completely, the way things come apart when they've been held together by will alone, and the will finally gets the message that it is allowed to let go. Claire was already running. She crossed the distance between them in seconds, and she went down to her knees in front of him, and she pulled him in, and he grabbed onto her with both arms with a force that said everything he didn't have words for. He pressed his face into her shoulder, and she pressed her face into his hair, and neither of them said anything. There were no words adequate to this moment, and they both seemed to understand that simultaneously, and the understanding was its own kind of communication, the deepest kind, the kind that lives below language. After a long moment, Lucas pulled back slightly. He looked at her face. He reached out and pressed one hand flat against the outside of her coat pocket, right where the envelope was, right where she had been holding it all night. "You kept it," he said. "I kept it," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, in a voice that was entirely his, steady and clear, and carrying in it that doubled quality of a child who sees things twice, "Did it work?" Claire pulled him back in. She held the back of his head with one hand, and she pressed her lips together against the answer that was trying to come out as something other than words. And she held him as tightly as she knew how, and she said into his hair, "It worked, baby. Everything you did, it worked." Damian Cross was uncuffed 40 minutes later when the federal prosecutor's team arrived on site and confirmed the standing arrangement. He stood in the freight yard with his hands free and his coat hanging open, and he watched the federal vehicles process the scene with the systematic efficiency of people disassembling years of work in real time. He watched, and he did not look away. He had decided not to look away. Whatever this cost him, he was going to witness every second of it. That felt like the right thing. That felt like the least he could do. He turned once and saw Claire still on her knees in the gravel, with Lucas in her arms, and the boy had his face buried in her shoulder, and Claire had one hand flat on the back of his head, and one arm wrapped around him, and her eyes were closed. And Damian Cross, who had not prayed in a very long time, looked at that and thought something without words, something that was in the same neighborhood as gratitude, but larger and less specific. Something that had to do with the existence of people like Claire Hayes in a world that did not deserve them, but needed them absolutely and completely and at every hour of the day and night. Cole was beside him, not close, not hovering, just present, the way a person stands when they have done a thing and are not sure yet what category it belongs to and are waiting for it to settle. "How does it feel?" Cole said, quietly. Damien thought about it honestly for a moment. Then he said, "Like losing everything and coming out heavier than I went in." Cole looked at him. "Is that good or bad?" Damien watched a federal agent carry a sealed container out of the warehouse. He watched Dale Whitfield sit in the back of a federal vehicle with the door open and his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He watched Lucas Hayes pull back from his mother just enough to reach up and wipe her face with the sleeve of his jacket, the way children do when they have decided to take care of the person who has been taking care of them. "I don't know yet," Damien said, "but it's real. And I haven't had much that was real in a long time." The trial did not happen quickly. Nothing that mattered ever did. It took 4 months for the federal prosecutor's office to build the case into something that could hold the full weight of what Nathan Stone had done. And those 4 months were their own kind of endurance, the slower, quieter kind that doesn't announce itself as courage, but requires every bit as much of it. Claire drove Lucas to school every morning and checked the mirror every time, and the black car never reappeared. And the absence of it took longer to trust than its presence had taken to fear. That was the thing about being hunted. It rewired you. The safety felt like a trap for weeks before it finally started to feel like safety. She got the job at the Stillwater Center in the 3rd month. She had applied on a Tuesday morning after dropping Lucas off, sitting in her car with the application open on her phone, and she had stared at the experience section for a long time before she started typing. She did not write down what had happened in Cedarfield in terms designed to impress anyone. She wrote it exactly as it was. A woman who had left a dangerous situation with her child and rebuilt from nothing, and had recently spent 72 hours in the middle of something that had taught her, with the specific authority of lived experience, exactly what women in crisis needed and exactly what they didn't. The director called her the same afternoon. She said she'd never read an application like it. Claire said she'd never had a reason to write one like it. She started the following Monday. Lucas went back to his classroom and sat in his seat and opened his books and did his work. His teacher, a woman named Mrs. Ellison, who had taught 3rd grade for 14 years and believed she had seen everything, reported to the school counselor after the first week that Lucas Hayes was the most quietly remarkable child she had encountered in her career. Not because he was exceptional in the conventional sense, though he was clearly intelligent, but because he had a way of listening in class that was different from other children. Not passive, not daydreaming, but genuinely present, as if he understood that what was being said might matter later, and he intended to remember it correctly. He still had Mr. Button. The repair along the back seam was visible if you looked, a line of slightly darker thread that didn't quite match the original. Lucas had done it himself, carefully, with a needle and thread from his mother's sewing kit, and he had done it intentionally imperfect. He told his mother it was a scar. He said scars were supposed to show. Claire had held that sentence for a long time afterward, the way you hold something that is too precise to let go of. Savannah returned to her ER shift and was assigned to the trauma intake team within 6 weeks, a position she had been recommended for twice before and passed over both times for reasons that had never been satisfactorily explained. She did not spend energy on bitterness about the years that had been taken from her by Dale Whitfield's quiet management of the hospital board. She had a specific, almost clinical relationship with wasted time. She acknowledged it, she measured it, and then she moved. She moved fast. By the end of the first month on the new team, her supervisor told her she was the most effective person she had. Savannah said she'd had good practice recently at working in conditions that didn't give her everything she needed and requiring herself to be sufficient anyway. Cole Parker was reassigned to the county's new Integrity Review Unit. He was the youngest person on it by 8 years and the least experienced by a significant margin. And he worked harder than anyone else there, which his supervisor noticed in the first week and noted formally in the second. He asked more questions than was comfortable. He pulled threads that more experienced colleagues had learned to leave alone. He was, by the consensus of everyone around him, going to be either an extraordinary career officer or a constant headache. And the supervisor who had that thought was self-aware enough to recognize that in her experience, those two things were usually the same person. He came to Claire's house one evening in the 5th month. Not officially, just showed up with a paper bag from the diner and the expression of someone who has been meaning to do a thing for a while and has finally stopped finding reasons to delay it. Lucas opened the door, looked at Cole, and said with complete seriousness, "Are you the deputy who held the radio?" Cole said yes. Lucas considered this for a moment. Then he opened the door wider and said, "Mom makes good coffee." Cole stayed for 2 hours. They talked about ordinary things mostly, the case at the margins, the department changes, what Cedarfield was starting to look like now that the machinery running underneath it had been dismantled and people were in the slow, uncomfortable process of deciding what to build in its place. And then Lucas came back into the room from wherever he'd been and handed Cole a drawing. Cole looked at it. It was a map of the freight yard, rendered in the careful, precise hand of a child who drew maps the way other children drew superheroes, with total commitment and enormous detail. Every exit marked, every position labeled. Cole's position on the north side marked with a small figure labeled the deputy who stayed. Cole folded the drawing and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at Lucas. He said, "Can I keep this?" Lucas said, "That's why I drew it." The trial itself lasted 9 days. Nathan Stone's attorney was skilled and expensive and mounted a challenge on every piece of evidence in sequence. And each challenge failed in sequence because the chain of custody was clean and the voice analysis was conclusive and the container logs were exact and the deletion records had Dale Whitfield's credentials on them in a timestamp that could not be argued into a different shape. The counting was on the recording, 1 beat, 2 beats, 3, and when the audio played in the courtroom on the 4th day, the specific quality of Nathan Stone's voice filling that formal space, that patient, unhurried authority of a man who had decided that other people's lives were line items in his ledger, produced a silence in the room that had its own weight. People shifted in their seats. Someone in the gallery made a sound that they cut off immediately. The jury took 4 hours. Dale Whitfield was convicted separately. Evidence tampering, obstruction, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. The judge set bail at a number that communicated clearly that he did not intend for Dale to be present in Cedarfield while the appeals moved through the system. Dale was led out of the courtroom in the same baritone stillness he had maintained throughout, the practiced face, the controlled posture, and then the doors closed behind him and he was simply gone. And the space he left in Cedarfield was not the space of an absence, but the space of something that had never been what it appeared to be, finally becoming honest about its own shape. Claire was called to testify on the 6th day. She had known it was coming and had prepared for it the way she prepared for hard things, by deciding in advance exactly what she was going to say and then saying it without softening the edges. She sat in the witness chair and she told it from the beginning. The pine cone walk, the gasoline smell, the drag mark in the soil, the chains, the mop handle, the town hall, Lucas handing her the bear at the door, the note in his handwriting, the SD card in his worn teddy bear that 3 armed men had searched for and failed to find because an 8-year-old boy had been paying attention in a room full of adults and had understood, without being told, that important things needed to be made harder to find. She told the court about her ex-husband, about the nights she had sat on the bathroom floor with Lucas, while the sounds on the other side of the door were things she did not describe in detail because the court did not need the detail. They needed the fact of it. She told them about the 2 bags, about walking out at midnight with her son asleep on her shoulder, about the years of rebuilding that followed, and the specific kind of fear that leaves marks you don't see until you're standing in a forest at 5 in the morning, pressing gauze on a stranger's temple, and recognizing in your body before your mind the smell of gasoline in the shape of danger, and the knowledge that you have been here before, in different rooms, and you know exactly what it costs to look away. She did not tell it to generate pity. She said that explicitly, leaning forward slightly, looking at the jury directly. She told it because they needed to understand what danger looked like to her and what she did when she recognized it, which was the same thing she had always done. She walked toward it. She helped. She did not calculate the cost first. She had never once in her life calculated the cost first, and she was not going to start. The jury did not look away. Damian Cross was not prosecuted. The arrangement had been fulfilled on both sides. The warehouse, the ledgers, the routes, the full dismantling of 6 years of Montana infrastructure delivered clean into federal hands. He closed the rest of what he had in the state, and he did not announce it, and he did not explain it. He simply stopped being the person who ran those things. And in the world where that kind of stopping gets noticed, it got noticed. And the things that were said about him in those rooms were not kind. He had gone soft. He had bought his way out with someone else's currency. He had cut off his own hand for a woman he'd known for 3 days, and a boy he had met while bleeding on a mattress. He did not argue with any of it. He let it sit there, and he carried it, and over time the weight of it changed. The way the weight of things always changes when you stop fighting what they are and start figuring out what to do inside them. He showed up at Lucas's school presentation in October. He sat in a chair made for a parent and was considerably too large for it and did not appear to notice. Lucas stood at the front of the classroom and explained to 23 third graders that his guest was someone who used to make bad decisions but had decided to make different ones because someone showed him what it looked like when you chose correctly. His teacher, Mrs. Ellison, held her pen very still above her notepad for the full duration of that sentence. Then she wrote it down word for word because she had been teaching for 14 years, and she knew when a child had just said something that deserved to be recorded exactly as spoken. After the presentation, walking out to the parking lot, Lucas fell into step beside Damian and looked up at him and said, with the directness of a child who has stopped being afraid of large men because he has watched one choose to bleed rather than cause harm, "Do you feel different from before?" Damian walked 3 steps before he answered, "Yes." "Better or worse?" Another 2 steps. "Smaller," Damian said, "but more like myself." Lucas considered this with the seriousness he applied to all things worth considering. "That sounds like better," he said. Damian looked down at him, and the man who had spent 20 years building himself into something untouchable felt something shift in his chest that he did not have a word for, and decided he did not need one. On a Saturday morning the following October, Claire and Lucas walked into the forest at the edge of Pinecrest Road. Lucas carried the canvas bag. The light came through the trees sideways and turned everything gold, and the pine needles underfoot were dry and amber, and the cold made their breath visible in the air between them. They walked the path without talking, the way people walk paths they know well, not because they need to get somewhere, but because the walking itself is the point. Because some places hold things that words can't, and you go back to them not to retrieve what happened, but to stand in the fact of it. To let your body remember what your mind sometimes tries to rationalize into something smaller than it was. Lucas stopped once. He looked into the trees in the direction of the clearing they never went to directly anymore. He stood there for a moment with the canvas bag in his hand and his gray eyes steady on the middle distance, and Claire watched him and did not rush him and did not speak. She knew what he was doing. She did the same thing herself, sometimes, in the car outside the Stillwater Center before a shift, thinking about the women waiting inside, Women with 2 bags or 3 bags, or sometimes nothing at all, having just made the decision that changed everything. She let herself stand in the fact of it. She let it cost what it cost. And then she went in and did the work. Lucas turned to her. He held up a dry pine cone he'd found at the base of an old ponderosa. She took it from him. She put it in the bag. He found another and another, and they moved deeper into the trees together, the way they had always moved through hard things. Together, forward, carrying what was needed, leaving nothing essential behind. Because that was what they were. That was what they had always been. A mother and her son who had walked toward the sound when everyone else would have walked away, and had held on to the truth when every force in that town was trying to take it from them, and had come through the other side of it, not unchanged, but unbroken. Standing in a Montana forest on a cold October morning, alive and together and moving forward, which was the only direction either of them had ever truly known.